Bridging Divides. I'm Brian Epps, Chief Program and Impact Officer with Sojourners, and I'm here with my wonderful colleague, Reverend Moya Harris. Can
Hello.
introduce herself.
Yes, I am Senior Programs Director here at Sojo Action, and I'm really excited to be here. Just come on in. Put your name in the chat, where you're from, where you're at.
Yes, let us know where you're located, what feelings you're arriving to this conversation with. We'd love to hear from you.
We're
And we're
excited
going to
to
give,
have
yeah,
you.
we're gonna give folks about 2 minutes to
Yeah,
join us.
there we go.
Yeah.
Right. Michigan is in the house. Welcome. Virginia. Oh, yeah, it's filling up. I can't keep up. Maybe you can read it to me, Brian. Awesome. We're from all over the place. Illinois, California,
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
yeah, Minnesota, New York. See if any Jersey is going to show up, Brian.
Listen, they better.
Ah, awesome. Famed Council of Churches, welcome. I love seeing where people are calling from. It's just really cool that since the pandemic, this is how we can connect and we continue to do it. It's very cool. Wisconsin is definitely in the house. Yeah. Yeah, that counts. I was born in New Jersey, too, so all right. Well, we might as well go ahead and get started. I was gonna say we have a quorum, but again, I'm Reverend Moya Harris, Senior Director of Programs here at Sojourners. I'm an ordained itinerant elder in the AME Church, and I am grateful for this opportunity to come together. So I want to be honest with you about this moment, Brand. I think we do a disservice when we soften sometimes where we are, but we're in these unprecedented times. I know we say that a lot, but we're in a convergence of empire, fear, and displacement, an erosion of democratic principles, all showing up on feeds and in our congregations and in our bodies. The reach of American power into Venezuela, Greenland, the Middle East, all of this is going on. Plus, we have first ladies making announcements all of a sudden on the news, and we don't know what's about to happen related to the Epstein files. It's just, there's attacks on immigrants and voters and the most vulnerable about amongst us. And somehow all of it's being done in a lot of spaces in the name of the Christian faith. This is a moment that is designed to exhaust us, to scatter us, and to make us lose our hope. But we didn't come here to be scattered today. We came here because we believe, and our ancestors believe, that there is a wisdom older and deeper than this moment. That the same tradition that carried people through slavery, through colonization, through everything, through the stealing of lands, everything that has happened to the human spirit, we have some resources to help us to get through this moment. Faith is not a feeling, it's a discipline. It's a way of living, of going about our business. And hope is not naivety, it's a practice. So we're not here to perform resistance. We're here to be formed by something that helps us get through this crisis until a better tomorrow. So we're going to set this table. We set the table for what we're going to talk about, the state violence that churches have to deal with, communities have to deal with. And we're excited about who we have here to be in conversation with. So I'm going to pass it off to Brian to get us started.
Thank you so much, Reverend. Listen, when we were thinking about conversations to have, especially focused on people of color, we were so excited to get these two voices to join us, and especially to talk about this topic. Um, First, I would love to introduce the Reverend Sandra Maria Van Apostel. Her voice is really redefining, defining what it means to be a Christian today. She is from Chicago, a city that was one of the first to be hit by militarization by this current administration. And they're just leading, even before this administration, of course, leading work as a second generation Latina um, around social justice. And so many of us have a frame of deconstruction and trying to reevaluate what it means to be a Christian today. And she's been grounded in doing that work as an activist and an author. Um, and so happy to have you here today to help us lead this conversation. And Reverend Jim Bear, uh, a Native American pastor from the Munsee Mohican Nation, based in Minnesota, another city and place deeply impacted by our empire today, is also just steeped in the history and our future of redefining what it means for us to be a nation and a people. His faith is really grounded in a practice of storytelling and justice. So much of our ability to resist in this moment is grounded in a deep practice that has been built in community that he's in. He's been doing work around racial justice, environmental justice, you name it. He's also a pastor in a Presbyterian church. And so today, again, just really happy to have two folks of color, two folks who are grounded in communities, who have a lot to share with all of us and a lot of lessons to teach all of us about how to resist and also how to dream in this moment. And so I'm so thankful for your voices today and welcome.
Thank you. It's my honor to be here with you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with everyone.
Well, let me provide us with a little bit more framing. Again, when we thought about this moment, um, so many of us are thinking about how to resist, how this moment is one of maybe even depression and fear. But our team likes to talk about joy as well and hope and what it means to be a person in a community of faith. And that's what we're coming to this conversation with. We all know what we can be scared of and what there is to fear. Um, Myself, I come from a tradition of Black folks in this country who, despite oppression and a lot to fear and a lot to run away from, we've continued to build community and continue to lean into the possibilities of what we can do together as a people. And there are so many practices to share there. And a similar frame is what we wanted to bring to this conversation, that um, there's so much that we can build on and create anew. And a lot of that also depends on traditions from the past that we have been torn away from, right? So we want to talk about the past, we want to talk about the present, we want to talk about the future, and we want to do so in a way that gives us not just hope, but leans into our faith as Christian folk. Um, so with that, I'll pass it back to Moya, who can further ground us in the theme and get us into this conversation, this dialogue.
Sure. I've really been thinking about how do we move away from being reactive and fear and move and lean more into creation, to practices that keep us from withdrawing amongst ourselves as Christians in this moment. We're dealing with this re-colonial air that's going on in this world. How can we, as members of congregations, or if we're not even a part of a congregation, how can people of faith lean into practices that help us to stay grounded and locked in the way that Jesus would have us locked, versus turning to fear and just being reactive in this moment? Either of you can go first.
Um, I think in response to that, first of all, I think we need to recognize the Christian story for what it is. The most trouble I have ever gotten from behind the pulpit was I was preaching a chapel at a rather conservative private Christian college in the suburbs here in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities. Student body was overwhelmingly like 85% white. Uh, Typical students you would expect at a private Christian college, suburban private Christian college. And the most trouble I've ever gotten in is I held up my Bible and I said, "You can't understand this. You have no means by which you can understand this." As white suburban students of privilege, you can't understand this because the gospel is a story of a people living in oppression, navigating that oppression, and finding their voice and identity. It is a narrative of liberation. And you cannot sing freedom songs when your hands have never been bound in chains.
Mm.
And so the only hope, and this is a bold statement, and I make no apologies for it, but the only hope for white people to truly understand the gospel is to be in community and close relationship with marginalized peoples, particularly people of color, because we as oppressed and marginalized peoples, we know what it is to have our hands bound in chains. And conversely, we know what it is to feel the liberation that comes from the breaking of those chains. And that is the narrative of the gospel. And so when we talk about moving away from fear and hopelessness, as people of color, Christianity cannot survive without our voice, our perspective, and our narrative. And I'll add to this and then stop talking for a moment here. As an American Indian, I mean, one of the things that I would say in the last decade and a half has really come to the forefront is this field of research around epigenetic trauma, which we know is real. We absolutely know that is real. But I will say this, we are all here. We are the descendants of those who survived that trauma. And so if epigenetic trauma is real, which we know it is, then conversely, epigenetic resilience is also real and lives in our bodies. And we, particularly we as people of color, of faith, need to remember that that ancestral memory of strength and resilience lives in our bodies.
That's good. That's real good. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Reverend Sandra, what say you?
Oh, but that was a lot I'm processing right there in my own body right now. Well,
Right, right.
I just want to, yeah, I want to start by like introducing myself a little bit more personally so you know where my comments are coming from. So I'm the daughter of immigrants. I'm a neighbor to immigrants. Like I live in a migrant immigrant neighborhood, and I have pastored most of my pastoral ministry in the context of young people of color and young communities of color and children and teens. And so I'm speaking from that perspective, and I thought about that question from that perspective, because when I think about the power that our communities have, just how powerful our communities have, the change makers that we come from, the abuelitas, like we like to say, the Latina community, the abuelitas that have really formed our theology, the mujeristas who have come as Latina womanist theologians who have come to tell us the truth, as my brother Reverend Jim Bear is talking about, like that we're inheritors of a lineage and of a story of people that lived out their faith in the context of not only persecution but financial and social injustice and realities that we because we're on this side of the ocean, don't fully understand. You know, we those of us that come from marginalized communities can understand, and then our Palestinian siblings can help us understand even more what that experience is. But we come from a people whose hope is defiant, and stands in the midst of that and says, even in the midst of that, they'll proclaim their strength and their power in their creator, and no matter what happens around us, we understand that we're going to live through this somehow. You know, at least that's the faith my grandmother put me in. You know, when she dragged me to mass every day of the week, basically. And she told me that this is at the center. At the center is the one who created you, and you orient yourself around your creator. And so I think that's what gives me the ability to not just react. I mean, do I get mad? Absolutely. Do I want to cuss people out? Yes, I do. Do I? Sometimes. But in the midst of that, the congregation that I live in and am around, when I enter the dock doors of our factory building, when I was at Grace and Peace, like entering into those doors and seeing the migrants that have come off those buses from Texas, and I'm walking through and they're singing out in a loud voice, I sought the Lord and he heard and he answered. I sought the Lord and he heard and he answered. How am I going to say, oh, you know, God is not present here with us? So I think it's not a shallow hope. It's a deep hope that comes out of a walk through the Darien Gap. And so I think that's what keeps me going. It's the practice of being in community, not just with people who come from my ethnic background, but from people who are most impacted by the policies and the laws that are squeezing the breath out of us. You know, I I think most of us are not surprised at what's happening in our world. This is what I mean. What can come? It's another repeat of a of a practice a century ago, you know, or 50 years ago. So I think what keeps us going is, for me, is being around people who understand the pain and yet their resilience carries me through. I'm so thankful that in 2020, I was congregating not at a church plant of upper middle class, wealthy, diverse communities. That's where I was the 10, 20 years before. I'm glad I was in the space I was, because that's the kind of thing I needed personally, to remember that I came from a people who were holding something about faith that I didn't even understand, as somebody who had now been overeducated and you know kind of taken of that space. So that's what helps me. I think there's many more things that help me, but I'm going to say the worship of the community that is most impacted is what keeps me going. Maybe how do I funnel this anger towards action
Mm,
instead of hopelessness?
mm, that's good. Real
Yeah,
good.
y'all are cooking already. Question one. I'm thinking about some things that y'all have named, right? Just our responsibilities and like even our brilliance and our knowledges of as people of color. And it's complex, right? Because we're here at the seat of empire that is actively like Southern colonialism is not a thing of the past. It is something that we are actively engaged in, right? In Venezuela, in Iran, in threats against Greenland, and continued threats against the communities that we even live in today. And yet, at the same time, we hold privileges that come attached to that, you know, to this work of empire. So, just can we just dive in a little bit more and talk about how we can continue to just have imagination about what we can do, who we can be, how our communities can thrive and sustain, resist all of these things, even though we're here basically on the quote unquote throne of this empire.
Um, Yeah, I will say, uh, as a storyteller, I am very conscious that one day our stories of this time will be told by our descendants. And um, as difficult as it has been to live, work, and exist in Minneapolis for the last 6 years, and even beyond that, I am very grateful to have lived, worked, and existed here in Minneapolis during some of the most tumultuous times of our generation. Because what I have seen is a response of creatively building community to resist empire. Um, and please understand, uh, I have gotten, since Operation Metro Surge, which is the official name of the enhanced ICE and DHS activities in Minneapolis, I have been reached out to from organizers and activists from across the country, and they say, how did you guys mobilize so quickly for this? And the answer is, there is nothing quick about this. The resistance of ICE in 2026 began in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd and the act of resistance against state violence on Black and brown bodies. It began prior to that with Philando Castile, and it began prior to that with the murder of Jamar Clark, um, in which what we saw was neighbors coming out and living together for the uplifting of our common humanity and the insistence that all of our humanity is honored, whether that's Black humanity, brown humanity, Latine humanity, queer humanity. Um, and what we are seeing, the incredible activities of communities in Minneapolis today in 2026, is really only the refined culmination of the work that began in 2020. And so when we talk about one of the things that is being lifted up by organizers across the country is this network of mutual aid that seemingly just randomly popped up out of nowhere as our particularly undocumented communities, but honestly, any immigrant family, documented or not, is now afraid to go outside of their home to go shopping in that. And so we had, organized shopping rotations where people would go grocery shopping for their Latine neighbors. You know, I know one woman who was an eighth grade. She's an eighth grade teacher who also was pretty active in justice circles. And she, like by herself, like just on her own, moved more than $400,000 through mutual aid for her neighbors. Um, but that is not something that just happens spur of the moment. That is 6 years of building community and being engaged together uh, in resistance. And so I think I lost your question, Brian, but I hope that is at least a close response to it.
You're doing good.
It's a great reflection. It's a great reflection. I hadn't thought of it that way when I heard the question, but it really provokes in me like my own kind of memory making and story of what's happened in Chicago. Like starting with the reality that the city of Chicago is only 32% white. So the city of Chicago is overwhelmingly people of color. And one of the things that we've tried to do within not only our local work here in Chicago, but also with Chasing Justice, which is the organization I run for younger leaders, is to really understand that we got us. Like no one else is going to get us. We got us. And so we even have a campaign we're running right now with a podcast series and a song that we wrote with Common Hymnal called We Got Us. And the idea is to kind of help people understand that the systems were never there. They were never designed for us. They were never designed for our flourishing. Never, ever. The separation of Latina children from their parents in 2017, 2018 is a repetition of what happened to our African American siblings and our Native siblings. It's a repetition of what happened during Japanese internment. So what we're talking about here is just the repetition of a system that was never designed for us. So when systems fail, like we are the ones that got us. And so I think about the city of Chicago. I'm like, well, yeah, 68% of the city of Chicago is folks who understand what it's like to live under oppressive systems. And so we've been working together in coalition since, our dear brother Jesse Jackson decided in the 60s and 70s, hey, what does it look like for Black, Brown, international, national folks to come together and to find commonalities in our story and commonalities in the things that are impacting us and speak up together. And that's what you saw in the responses to Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago was already formed networks and relationships and communities that were like, hey, we haven't done this thing together, but now how do we move ourselves to work in interfaith space with synagogues and with rabbis and imams and Christian priests and all of us together across our so many things we could disagree on. And yet we're like, we need to protect our neighbors. We need to protect our congregations. And so what does that look like to rise together and to say, hey, you know who's going to take care of us? We're going to take care of us. And so the thing is, in the city of Chicago, for example, I was sharing with some students at a Christian college locally here that it's not news when Latino pastors are caring for Latino immigrants. It's not news when Asian American pastors are caring for Asian immigrants. It's not news when Black moms are caring for kids on their block. That's just what we have to do. And so nobody was capturing the beautiful work that was already there until it was elevated nationally because of the crisis. And then it was like, look at these people in Chicago. And I oftentimes have people visit me and they're like, man, Chicago's so organized. Like it's such an organized city. Like you have all these networks and these things that you do. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, so things like community organizing and social work and all these disciplines that are studied here in the city of Chicago. But it's because communities, whether Irish immigrants or African Americans during the Great Migration or the Latina migrant community, just say like, hey, who's going to take care of us if we don't take care of ourselves? And communities of faith have stepped in and done the work. And by and large, those communities of faith historically have been BIPOC communities of faith. And now we have our siblings that are joining us, and we're like, great, so thankful you're here. What took you so long? And also, I'm not going to give you an award for it. Thank you for showing up. And so I think it is hard to have that. I think, and that's part of naming the system. It's kind of part of naming and identifying how colonialism and empire works is that when people with power finally show up, they get to be written about in all the journals and magazines, and they get to be broadcast coast to coast on the news. But our communities had already been working here, and our community members have already been shot and killed here. Nobody was writing about it. So I think that's part of this journey for me personally as a local leader and as a national leader is to say, hey, we need to make sure that we pursue justice justly. We need to make sure that when we tell the story, as our brother has already said, like the story actually matters. And so how can we tell stories that honor the reality of what we're living locally? It's to talk about who was actually doing the work before the work was highlighted.
That's good. All of that.
That is good.
Yeah. Like our stories will be told by our ancestors. That resonates so much with me because I'm always thinking, I went to a lecture once and it said, what are you doing to become a good ancestor? But even the stories that we leave behind for those that come after us is so important. And the hope is defiant. Like all there's so many nuggets in all of this. But I want to just broaden this out to a geopolitical perspective, right? We look at what's going on in the world, and it's not a coincidence that the places that are being attacked are places where people of color are predominantly. They're going to countries and trying to exploit resources and coercion and all of that. Um, and as citizens of the world, the United States can be so single-minded. And I think we're seeing now with the war that's going on in Iran, um, people are starting to pay a little bit more attention globally. How can how can communities of faith who are dealing with what's going on in their cities, but also learn to deal with stuff that's beyond them, to have a real honest moral imagination, realizing that what's going on here has happened in other places, and there's people that have dealt with this for generations, and people to learn to listen to the people that have dealt with it. So that question kind of was convoluted, but how can people of faith learn to tap into that moral imagination that is not so shallow?
Um, you know, Americans are very American. Let me just say that. Even in our conversations about justice, we rarely go outside of our own space to ask how we got here in relationship to our siblings around the world. So in conversation with South Africans or Kenyans or people or Venezolanos or people, they're always like, yeah, you guys just only, when you talk about these things, you only talk to yourselves and you don't learn from us. So I think that is an American thing that we have somehow been educated into, and I think that's true for all of us that carry an American passport. We're prone to that kind of insularness, you know, because we have enough to deal with. It's kind of like we're already dealing with a lot, even if we're sharing one another's loads as BIPOC folks here. It's like, you want me to take on Palestine too? Now you want me to take on Iran? Now you want to take, and it feels very like, oh, I can't. But I think one thing that I've learned is from my global siblings is the ability to enlarge our hearts to embrace more comes from finding the common threads of how imperialism and colonialism and capitalism, really, how those things have really impacted the global space. So anytime something happens overseas, we have to be asking, how am I complicit in that? And not just war, but lots of things. I learned that from my Argentine father. I don't know if you guys know anything about Argentina, but it's a pretty interesting Latin American country. And so, because it's socialist, and because Che Guevara comes from Argentina, all those he taught me to like look at U.S. history and current U.S. realities with a very different lens. So when NAFTA happened in the 80s, 90s, I remember I was in grade school. I was like, what are you talking to me about NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement? And he's like, this is going to impact migration from Latin America. And he started telling me all that would happen. He's like, that Banana Republic, that coup that's happening in Central America? This is how that's going to, and I'm like, ay, papi, por favor. No, like, don't talk to me about your conspiracy theories, like, and the reality is everything that he told me happened. Um, all of the push pull that's happening in Latin America to the US. It's like, well, what did you expect would happen when you crumble their economy? What did you think would happen when you go to Colombia with your best architects and engineers, you steal all of their gold and all of their emeralds? What do you think would happen when you went, So I think this kind of idea of like, how does our international policy impact the world? And then what happens when we don't want to deal with the repercussions of how our policy pushed people out of their own. You think, have you ever been to Central America or Latin America? You think anyone wants to leave Colombia or Venezuela? I mean, my God, it's the most beautiful place in the whole wide world. Why would anyone leave there? And to carry a child on their back through thousands of hours and miles of walking through dangerous jungles, to come to a country where people will look at you like you're and treat you like you're trash. Like, why would anyone do that unless they were desperate? And so I think about Venezuela in particular, and I think, like, yeah, they had a very corrupt leader. Absolutely. People in Venezuela were very happy to see him go. They just weren't like super excited that we asserted our moral superiority, went into their country, and, decided that we would police the entire, international community. So I think these things are very complicated, but they start with, like, when you see something on the news, you go to yourself, how am I complicit in that reality? Um, for our domestic issues as well as our international issues. How am I complicit in that reality? We all have computers that carry minerals that exploit people in Africa. So we don't want to receive them, or we don't want to offer any aid, but we've created problems in the Democratic Republic of Congo and other places because we consume without thinking about how our consumption impacts others. So repentance and curiosity is where I would start.
That's incredibly good. One practice that I got into a handful of years ago that is actually, it's an incredibly hard thing to embody. Even though, I'm an Indigenous person, I'm a cisgendered heterosexual man living in the United States and recognize I carry a tremendous amount of privilege based on my social location. But one of the things that I workshop with people of diverse audiences is we need to get into the discipline, whatever the social issue is, right? If it's patriarchy, if it's racism, if it's imperialism. But for this context, we'll use race globally, right? Globally, Black and brown people die at a younger age than American people. And the reason for that is because I'm comfortable with letting that happen. And that's that complicity in the system that Sandra was saying, right? I, you know, I have an iPhone here sitting next to me. The fact that I have an iPhone sitting next to me means that somewhere across an ocean, a person of color is living a lifestyle that is less than ideal. And it's the shoes I buy, it's the clothes I wear, it's the cars I buy. I'm complicit in it. And I think that first step is that consciousness. And there is no better tool to transform the human heart than human story. And that's what it was for me. That was that encounter, that was that spark, that was that catalyst. I grew up like, if I still lived the life I did in the churches that I was a part of in my childhood, I would be wearing the red hat right now. I would have drunk the Kool-Aid. I grew up in a fundamentalist, evangelical, super conservative Pentecostal denomination, right? You mark whatever MAGA believes, I was part of that. And my vision of the kingdom of God, which translates to my vision of who's actually a human being, was very, very narrow. Very narrow. I would never explicitly say I think they're subhuman or anything like that, but in every aspect of my being and the way I lived my life, I didn't care about their humanity until I started actually sitting down with people that challenged that for me. And I encountered their story, whether it was, um, you know, uh, gay, lesbian, and queer young people of faith who were doing the GLBT freedom rides around Christian colleges back in the early 2000s, and then I'm sitting there and I'm like listening to their story and I'm like, I don't even believe that this person is legitimately a Christian, and yet they're praying more than I do. They have a more disciplined, or like actually living out their faith in a way that I should be living out. And then my view of who was human started broadening. Um, and so I think it is that raised social consciousness, not just here in the United States, but globally. I think, there is many things to lament about this current administration, but one thing, I don't know that we can celebrate it, but one thing we can maybe be grateful for is at least he's like just brutally honest, you know? We're not bombing countries under the guise of weapons of mass destruction. He's just explicitly saying it's for the oil. Like he's saying it. Venezuela, it's for the oil. Iran, it's for the oil. That's what he's saying. So at least we're not nuancing it behind BS falsities that really amount to nothing. We're just explicitly naming colonization. We're naming imperialism. And so maybe that's one thing to be grateful for is we don't have a straw man that's set up that we have to argue against. We can just explicitly say this is for oil and this is exploitative of the rest of the world. And this is not who we need to be. This is not who we are called to be.
Yeah, and I think some of even to some of the questions that are being asked in the Q&A, I think sometimes we feel like, well, that it's so complicated. And I'm like, well, at least name what you can name, lament what you can lament, say a thing is a thing. Like we shouldn't be incarcerating and you know, allowing babies in detention to die because we're giving them putrid water for their formula. Say the thing, like, yes, immigration is complicated. Yes, we need a pathway to citizenship. Yeah, yes. But when your administration is changing the status of people while they're in the country, say the thing. Name it. That's you're changing the rules. When the administration is not following its own laws, however, much they need to be reformed, you're supposed to show a judicial. I mean, that's why people are like, do we even do know your rights trainings anymore for our congregations? Because they have no rights. We have no rights anymore. I have to tell people like carry a copy of your passport with you at all times. It feels like a pass where if you don't have your papers on you, and you're wearing a gold star and you don't show those papers, then you get thrown into the train that's heading somewhere. I think we're living regime and we need to name that. And then our government says, if you say anything bad about X, Y, and Z, or your congregation stand against ICE, then we're coming after you. At least we could say, this is complicated, but we have basic civil rights in this country. We should have them. You told us. That's why I tell my mom, because I think sometimes, especially when you grow up in an immigrant home, your parents are like, just be thankful you're here because they know what they came from. Be thankful you're here and you have these rights. I'm like, well, I'm not a guest here. I was born here. My country made a promise to me, and I'm going to keep telling it it's failing in its promise until it, even if it was false to begin with, I'm going to keep naming it. So I think part of it is, even as complicated as some of these global realities are, geopolitical realities are, we can at least say what we know fundamentally probably should be true. And and work towards that. I think that's how you have movement, for example, on things like the immigration table, which is bipartisan, it's ecumenical, it's, you know, they're saying like, yeah, we can't agree on everything, but can we at least agree on the humanity of people? And so I think that's what where and I'm again, like, I work mostly with younger leaders, and I work primarily in a context here on the West Side. It's not like academic, you know, scholars, let's call it that. So it's like people are just trying to go like, how do I live here? How do we raise our voices? How do we access our power? How do we understand our agency? How do I lead my congregation in worship while the sky seems to be falling down on us? How do we name a thing without getting political? Those are the kinds of questions that are around me all the time, you know? No, how do you not say something when our government is completely and utterly out of line? The other day, it's like if the UN says this is a war crime, and the international community says this is a war crime, and you know all these other things saying this is a war crime, and you're just like, oh yeah, and your own country's like, this is actually against our very laws, and you're like, well, I think I'll just do it anyway. I mean, at that point, that's why I think many of us, honestly, to Reverend Moya's comment, it's like, so many of us sometimes we just feel like, do we even do anything anymore? Do we even say anything anymore? Do we even show up anymore when nobody is listening? And the answer I have to that is absolutely yes, because it's a part of our formation, and it's a part of our bear witness, and it's a part of our integrity for the come after us. Even if nothing changed, even if I pass away next week and nothing changed in my lifetime, I will have said that when it was happening, I said something, I did something, I showed up, I gave, I participated. And that's all I can do. Just Holy Spirit. I'm not the person with the most political power.
I've heard it said that out of chaos, oftentimes comes the best creation. Like there's something that happens in the chaos. I think Septima Clark said something like that. Like she's not afraid of the chaos because out of that newness comes out of it. And I would even say that's Good Friday, right? Out of that, the lynching of the cross, God used all the power of the resurrection to lift Jesus from the dead. And therefore we walk with that power. And I think sometimes we forget that we have the ability to tell stories that will give life to people who need to hear what needs to be, you know, what hear that hope. I love the fact that Reverend Jim Bear, that you lean on the narrative as that thing that keeps us, that connects us, and the resilience of Reverend Sandra of being in community, right? 2020, right? If you didn't have community, it was just horrible. So I thank you for all of that. And you've already started getting to the questions. So Brian, I was going to hand it over to you because we were flowing and it's good stuff.
Um, Maybe with our time that we have, I see so many questions from the audience that we're obviously not going to be able to get to, but this is one from Tony, really asking about kind of this extending Reverend Sandra's last comment about what we can do, how we can show up in this moment, and specifically around congregations, right? Discerning the difference between authority and resistance. And how should like what should folks do? I imagine there's a lot in that question, right? There's fear of congregations. There's holding tension between differences of opinions and politics in congregations, differences in theology with congregations, and all that might be wrapped up in a conversation. But if folks are confused about kind of knowing how to discern in this moment or even knowing how to show up, what would you say to them?
I would remind all of us that any scripture that is written that mentions submission to a government authority was a means of survival, because at the time it was written, the church was actively persecuted by the imperial power. Then Constantine comes along and gets into bed with the Roman Empire, or gets into bed with the Catholic, or just the church. And ever since then, Christianity has been this marriage between colonial imperialism and theological orthodoxy. And guess what? Theological orthodoxy has lost that battle, particularly when it comes to American Christianity. Um, so I really am not concerned about, from a scriptural basis, submitting to government authority. I really am, because it is a context that does not apply at all right now. What I am driven by is the moral imperative to uplift the humanity of all of God's creation. Plain stop. And in any way that I see that imago Dei, that image of God, being violated in my brown sisters, my black brothers, my queer and transgender relatives, anything that is a threat to that full humanity is going to receive my full-throated embodied resistance. I have been knocked down, dragged around by police for doing that. I have been maced for resisting immigration officers in trying to separate families. And I can think of nowhere else where Jesus would call me to be than in the midst of the tear gas, wiping the mace out of my eyes. So I understand the premise of the question, but I just reject the premise that we really need to be all that concerned about submitting to governmental authorities. That's a lot of activism. That's many years of activism coming through.
Yeah. um, I agree with you, and I think particularly because it's rooted in the understanding of what the scriptures meant to the people it was being written to. Contextually, they were outside of empire. Now we are the empire. And I think that the data shows that on something like immigration, but on many things, the data shows that it's Christians that are supporting the policies and the laws that are enacted to dehumanize my neighbors and my relatives. You know, and that I think that's what makes it hard. I think that's what makes it hard. It's like I'm not like choosing into this activism stuff. I'm surviving, and I'm trying to help my family survive. And we're not observing the story or kind of commenting on the story. It's not like a current event that we're sitting at the table chatting about. It's we're asking, how do we survive this moment of time that we find ourselves in? And you say, wow, the people that say they love me, and the people that sing songs in Spanish because they want to be so multi-ethnic and so, you know, global, and yet they support these policies that are, and the language, it's like even the language that's coming from, so I agree. But what I wanted to add to all the wonderful things that Reverend Jim Bear said is that I think we need to think about economics as a way of speaking as well. And so if you think about the way that even things like the bus boycott of the civil rights era wasn't just that it was a boycott, like a a stand in that way, like a political stand. It was that it affected the bottom line. And we are the United States of America, so we will care what affects the bottom line. That is how we are wired. And so we need to be thinking about how does boycott, divestment, and sanctions, a sustained, not a day off of shopping, a sustained boycott, divestment, and sanctions looks like, because the people that are influencing our lawmakers on a state and federal level are companies, large companies that have a stake in oil, pharmaceuticals, education, all the things that we, So I think we want to ask, like, what does that look like in 2026 for us to do that? To take seriously, like, we're just not going to have creature comforts the way that we like them. And we're going to do our part in that. And we're going to invite, for example, in the city of Chicago, Otis Moss, third from Trinity, invited the faith or pastors and clergy to say, like, how do we get behind these boycotts during Black Friday and during Christmas? And so we're like, okay, let's mobilize our congregations and our people around that. And I mean, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but at the end, some of those companies had to pay attention and listen. So hear people are listening and what can we do around it. I think this is also where emerging leaders really are paying attention. I think people in their 20s, they're like paying attention to what are the creative ways that the church is participating or being silent in some of these broader movements of boycott. And so I think this is one of the things we can do. Like, I haven't, one time a long time ago, somebody told me, hey, big box store does X, Y, and Z globally. And I haven't walked into that store since 2020 or since the year 2000. Before I didn't know. Now I know. Now I can't unknow. And so it's inconvenient, but we do it because money talks.
Listen, that's a call to action, y'all, right? Um, at a conference I was just at, there was a legendary Black Reverend Cassandra Gold who called on white folks in the room, especially, to join specifically the African American folks in the room in the Target boycott, right? And I've been boycotting them and some other folks. It sounds like a sacrifice. It's not really. Once you get into it, you don't miss it. But it does make deep impact. So it's a call to action. I thank you for Reverend Sandra. At the start of our conversation, Reverend Jim Bear, you asked us to show up, and you concluded that way, right? Put our minds, our hearts, our bodies on the line. Thank you for that call to action. I want to also ask everybody who's joined us today, and thank you for joining us today, to go deeper into what Jim Bear said and to be in community, not just solidarity, not just affinity, right? Not just allyship, but in community and learning from communities of colors who've been on the front line. And one person asked about the soundtrack, right? Not just listen to the music or the movies or the art, but really be in community with the folks who are doing this work, and to learn from them and to join them and to follow their leadership to get us to justice. Thank you so much for that call to action, Reverend Jim Bear. Um, as we come to a close, I want to just, my gosh, thank you is just not enough to both of you for joining us today, for these call to actions, for your words, for your work. Literally, I think y'all could have just came to the Zoom and logged out immediately. And we could have just talked about all the work you did instead of having you talk to us today, because you've done so much already. But thank you for your showing up across the movement and for being in community with us today and sharing so much with us. I really appreciate it. I'm sure everybody here watching does too. We want to share some resources with you all, and our panelists might want to do the same. I believe my colleague Courtney might drop a link in the chat with all of our events that are coming up. For those of you who are interested in learning about nonviolent resistance, and we have a training coming up in Austin and multiple trainings coming up across this year in which you can learn and be in community with other clergy and other folks of faith who are going to be demonstrating across this country. We would love for you to apply and sign up to one of those trainings. We have a really magnificent series of webinars that are also on that link, including on April 27th this month, one on immigration and specifically for resourcing folks who are supporting migrants and immigrants across this country. My colleague, Reverend Moya Harris, you might want to jump in here and talk about our pole chaplain work.
Sure. For those of you that have been with us before, Faiths United to Save Democracy is our initiative for voter protection. We have started recruiting for poll chaplains sooner, and we have our first training this coming Monday. So we'll have a link in the chat where you can register for that to get the training. We have key states, but even if you are not in any of our key states, please sign up anyway. Just click one of the states and come to the training on Monday. And we would love to see you because we want to be in spaces to make sure that our vote counts and that we can hold people accountable that we elect.
Yes, it's a serious work. We all know that our election process has been under threat and will be under serious threat this year. And we need your support in making sure that folks' right to vote is protected, that people feel safe and supported at the polls. Please sign up and support us in this effort. Finally, this series is part of this conversation rather is part of a longer series of conversations, and we missed you in March. So we have next month 2 dates on the calendar, May 7th, May 14th, and we hope that you can join us for both. Please spread the word, and you'll find the information about that on the same link that Courtney shared. Again, I just want to thank our speakers and open it up to y'all if you have events that you want to share, new books that are coming out, new articles that you wrote, community events happening. Feel free to jump in now. We would love to hear from you.
I would just throw this out as a resource. There's a group here in the Twin Cities. It's called the Twin Cities Interfaith Movement Chaplains. This movement arose out of 2020 as a response to George Floyd's murder and the racial unrest that took place. And this is really, it's organized by a very good friend of mine, an incredible colleague, Reverend Dr. Kelly Sherman Conroy. She's a Lakota woman and a Lutheran pastor. And this is just a response to the recognition that when clerical vestments show up in a crisis space, it immediately de-escalates that. And so this is a movement of people. It's broadly interfaith. There is Muslims, there's Jews, there's Christians, there's Buddhists. And it has been an incredible tool of organizing mutual aid, watching ICE activity during Operation Metro Surge, being present. There's a lot of trainings. So I would just lift that up as a resource and perhaps a model for organizing in your own communities. One thing I do want to put out there for the white bodies that are in our audience, Brian mentioned, make the effort to show up for these communities of color, to learn from the communities that have already been done, which we see white people do all the time. But inevitably what happens is the white person will misstep, they will get corrected, and then they disappear. And that is not showing up. That's not community building. Go into it sitting under Black and brown women, Black and brown, bodies sitting under their leadership. Go into it knowing that you're going to make mistakes, but that's what community does. You're gonna get corrected, take your correction humbly, and continue to show up. That's my biggest frustration, is when white people show up and then as soon as things get a tiny bit awkward or uncomfortable, they disappear. And we don't need more of that. We need the resilience that lives in our bodies to show up and manifest.
Thank you for that. Yes.
I'll just say again, sorry, I don't know why I keep doing that. The work that I do locally obviously is more broad, but the work that I do with Chasing Justice is focused on emerging leaders. So if you know folks that are, under 30, under 35, who are like, ugh, I love Jesus, I love justice, I'm having a complicated relationship with, churches and then we'd love to help to steward that and to walk alongside of them. We have a cohort that's coming up. It's 4 sessions long for leaders under 30 called Live Justly, and it's for super practical things around what does it look like to live a lifestyle of justice. So if you have, I don't know, children, aunties, uncles, friends, if you've aged out, sorry, but you can send your friends. I think the idea of the is this particular generation, I think, is living through something that mine did not. And the overwhelm that they have is distinct to the tools they were given. And so we want to create a space where they can openly and freely talk about that experience together as a way to become integrated to the whole. So yeah, just if you have folks, you can, everything else, podcasts are open to everybody, so check it out. But I think just having people that you're walking alongside of, we wanted to continue to make those spaces. And then I put it also in the chat, the Faith Over Fear Network here in Chicago, which is similar, I think, to what Reverend Jim Bear is talking about, is interfaith clergy who show up in our vestments and walk alongside of community leaders. So would love to have you guys check that out as well.
Thank you. And as I listen to this work, I'm just even sitting here with more gratitude for all the work that y'all do. Thank you for sharing your resources. I have to voice over special thanks to our colleague Courtney Brooks, who's been so much to do with this series and our work and holding our community together. She's in charge of all of our engagement. So I know if you've been to one of our events before, you've heard her voice through email. You'll get a follow-up sharing this recording, and I hope that you can share with your networks widely. Let folks know what we're doing. Let folks know about this conversation. And thank you again all for joining us today. Be safe. We're praying with you and for you, and we hope to see you at our next event. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Thank you so much. This